Wuthering Heights is more than just a classic novel. It's a dark, passionate story that explores the depths of human emotion, the power of obsessive love, and the destructive nature of revenge. Written by Emily Brontë and published in 1847, this book shocked Victorian readers with its raw intensity and unconventional characters. Today it stands as one of the greatest works of English literature, a story that continues to captivate readers with its haunting atmosphere and complex exploration of love, class, and human nature. To understand Wuthering Heights, we first need to understand its creator, Emily Brontë. Emily was born in 1818 in Yorkshire, England, into a family that would produce three famous novelists. She and her sisters, Charlotte and Anne, grew up in the isolated parsonage of Haworth, surrounded by the wild Yorkshire moors. These windswept landscapes would later become the dramatic setting for her only novel. Emily's life was marked by tragedy and isolation. Her mother died when she was just 3 years old, and two of her older sisters died in childhood. Growing up in this remote, harsh environment shaped Emily's imagination and gave her a unique perspective on human nature. Unlike her more social sisters, Emily was intensely private and preferred the company of nature and animals to people. She rarely left home and spent most of her time writing poetry and walking on the moors. This isolation and her deep connection to the wild landscape are reflected in every page of Wuthering Heights. Emily Brontë wrote Wuthering Heights in secrecy, publishing it under the male pseudonym Ellis Bell because women writers were not taken seriously in Victorian England. The novel was published in December 1847, just 1 year before Emily's tragic death from tuberculosis at the age of 30. She never knew that her only novel would become one of the most celebrated works in English literature. When the book was first published, critics were shocked and disturbed by its dark themes, violent characters, and unconventional structure. Victorian readers expected novels to be moral tales with clear heroes and villains, but Wuthering Heights offered something completely different. It presented characters who were neither purely good nor purely evil, and it refused to condemn or justify their actions. The novel was considered too wild, too savage, and too passionate for its time. The story of Wuthering Heights is set in the Yorkshire moors during the late 18th and early 19th centuries. The novel takes place primarily in two houses: Wuthering Heights, a dark, isolated farmhouse exposed to harsh weather and wild winds, and Thrushcross Grange, a refined, civilized estate in the valley below. These two houses represent opposing forces throughout the novel. Wuthering Heights symbolizes passion, wildness, and nature, while Thrushcross Grange represents civilization, refinement, and social order. The story begins when Mr. Lockwood, a gentleman from London, rents Thrushcross Grange and visits his landlord, Heathcliff, at Wuthering Heights. During his visit, Lockwood experiences strange and frightening events that lead him to ask the housekeeper, Nellie Dean, about the history of the two houses and their inhabitants. What follows is a complex tale told through multiple narrators, spanning 2 generations and revealing a story of passionate love, bitter revenge, and ultimate redemption. At the heart of Wuthering Heights is the relationship between Catherine Earnshaw and Heathcliff, one of the most intense and controversial love stories in literature. Heathcliff is brought to Wuthering Heights as a homeless orphan by Mr. Earnshaw, Catherine's father. From the moment they meet, Catherine and Heathcliff form a deep, almost supernatural bond. They spend their childhood running wild on the moors together, and their connection goes beyond normal romantic love. Catherine famously declares, "I am Heathcliff," suggesting that their souls are one. However, their relationship is complicated by social class and ambition. When Catherine's brother Hindley inherits Wuthering Heights after their father's death, he treats Heathcliff as a servant and denies him education and respect. This social degradation drives a wedge between Catherine and Heathcliff. Although Catherine loves Heathcliff deeply, she decides to marry Edgar Linton, the wealthy and refined owner of Thrushcross Grange. She tells Nellie that marrying Heathcliff would degrade her, even though she knows he is her soulmate. This decision sets in motion a cycle of revenge and suffering that will span decades and destroy multiple lives. Heathcliff's character is one of the most complex and controversial in all of literature. He is simultaneously a victim and a villain, a romantic hero and a cruel tormentor. As a child, Heathcliff is abused and humiliated by Hindley, and he suffers the ultimate betrayal when Catherine chooses to marry Edgar instead of him. These experiences transform him from a vulnerable orphan into a ruthless man driven by revenge. After Catherine's marriage, Heathcliff disappears for 3 years and returns as a wealthy gentleman, though the source of his wealth remains mysterious. His return marks the beginning of his carefully planned revenge against everyone who wronged him. Heathcliff's revenge is methodical and cruel. He deliberately marries Edgar's sister Isabella to hurt Edgar and gain control of Thrushcross Grange. He treats Isabella with contempt and cruelty, destroying her life in the process. He also seeks revenge on Hindley by encouraging his gambling and drinking, eventually gaining ownership of Wuthering Heights when Hindley dies in debt. But Heathcliff's revenge doesn't stop with the first generation. He extends his cruelty to the next generation, forcing Catherine's daughter, also named Catherine, to marry his sickly son Linton so he can claim her inheritance. What makes Heathcliff so fascinating is that despite his cruelty, we understand his pain. Emily Brontë doesn't excuse his actions, but she shows us the suffering that created him. Heathcliff is a victim of class prejudice, racial discrimination. He is described as dark-skinned and possibly of Romani origin, and emotional betrayal. His love for Catherine never dies, and even decades after her death, he is still obsessed with her memory. He has her grave opened so he can see her face one more time, and he spends years longing for his own death so he can be reunited with her. This combination of deep love and terrible cruelty makes Heathcliff one of the most psychologically complex characters in literature. He forces us to ask difficult questions. Can we sympathize with someone who causes so much suffering? Is revenge ever justified? Can love survive beyond death? Catherine Earnshaw is equally complex and controversial. She is passionate, willful, and deeply conflicted. Catherine represents the struggle between nature and civilization, between following one's heart and conforming to social expectations. She genuinely loves Edgar Linton and appreciates the comfort and respectability he offers, but she also knows that Heathcliff is her true soulmate. Her famous speech to Nellie reveals the depth of her confusion. She says her love for Edgar is like the foliage in the woods, changeable with the seasons, but her love for Heathcliff is like the eternal rocks beneath. She knows that marrying Edgar is a betrayal of her true self, but she cannot resist the lure of social advancement and civilized life. This internal conflict destroys Catherine. She becomes ill and dies, giving birth to her daughter, caught between two worlds and unable to reconcile her divided self. Catherine's ghost haunts the novel both literally and figuratively. appearing to Lockwood in his nightmare and remaining in Heathcliff's tortured memory for decades. The secondary characters in Wuthering Heights are not just supporting players, but represent different philosophical and moral perspectives. Edgar Linton represents civilized society and gentle refinement. He is kind, cultured, and genuinely loves Catherine, but he lacks the passionate intensity that Catherine craves. Edgar's weakness is his inability to understand or match Catherine's wild nature. He tries to tame her and bring her into the civilized world of Thrushcross Grange, but this only contributes to her internal conflict and eventual death. Isabella Linton, Edgar's sister, represents romantic illusion and its consequences. She becomes infatuated with Heathcliff's dark, mysterious persona, seeing him as a romantic hero from a Gothic novel. Her marriage to Heathcliff teaches her the brutal reality behind the romantic fantasy. She suffers terribly in the marriage and eventually escapes, but not before giving birth to Heathcliff's son, Linton. Isabella's story is a cautionary tale about the danger of confusing romance with reality. Hindley Earnshaw, Catherine's brother, represents the destructive power of resentment and jealousy. After his father brings Heathcliff home and seems to favor the orphan, Hindley develops a bitter hatred that leads him to abuse Heathcliff cruelly once he inherits Wuthering Heights. Hindley's own life spirals into alcoholism and gambling after his wife dies, making him easy prey for Heathcliff's revenge. Hindley shows how cruelty breeds more cruelty in an endless cycle. Nellie Dean, the housekeeper and primary narrator, represents practical wisdom and moral judgment. She has witnessed the events of both generations and serves as our guide through the complex story. However, Nellie is not a neutral observer. Her decisions and interventions, often well-meaning, sometimes contribute to the tragedy. She keeps secrets, makes moral judgments, and occasionally fails to act when action might have prevented suffering. This makes her a complex narrator whose reliability we must sometimes question. The second generation of characters offers hope for redemption and healing. Young Catherine Linton, daughter of Catherine Earnshaw and Edgar, initially inherits her mother's spirit and willfulness, but also has her father's gentleness and capacity for forgiveness. Hareton Earnshaw, Hindley's son, has been deliberately degraded by Heathcliff as revenge against his father. Heathcliff has denied Hareton education and treated him as a servant, just as Hindley once did to Heathcliff. This creates a disturbing mirror image of the past. However, Hareton retains his essential goodness despite his rough exterior. The relationship that develops between young Catherine and Hareton reverses the tragedy of the first generation. Catherine teaches Hareton to read and helps him recover his dignity. Their love is based on mutual respect, growth, and healing, rather than destructive passion. They represent the possibility of breaking the cycle of revenge and creating a healthier form of love. The themes of Wuthering Heights are as complex and layered as its characters. The most obvious theme is the destructive nature of obsessive love. The relationship between Catherine and Heathcliff goes beyond normal romantic love into something more primal and absolute. Catherine says she is Heathcliff, suggesting their identities are merged. This kind of total consuming love is portrayed as both transcendent and dangerous. It elevates them to an almost supernatural level, but also makes it impossible for them to function in ordinary society or find happiness. Their love cannot be contained by social conventions or even by death itself. Emily Brontë seems to suggest that such intense passion, while deeply real, is incompatible with life in civilized society. Another major theme is the conflict between nature and civilization. Wuthering Heights represents the wild, natural world, untamed and harsh. Thrushcross Grange represents civilization, culture, and social refinement. Characters must navigate between these two worlds, and those who deny either aspect of their nature suffer. Catherine tries to choose civilization over nature by marrying Edgar, and this choice destroys her. Heathcliff is forced from nature into civilization as a child, then returns to exact revenge, becoming a dark hybrid of both worlds. The theme of social class and its destructive effects runs throughout the novel. Heathcliff's degradation is based entirely on his social position as a homeless orphan with no family or inheritance. Although Mr. Earnshaw treats him as a son, the rest of society, including Hindley, sees him as inferior. Catherine's decision to marry Edgar instead of Heathcliff is fundamentally based on class considerations. She tells Nellie it would degrade her to marry Heathcliff in his current social position. This emphasis on social class over personal worth drives much of the tragedy. Heathcliff's revenge often takes the form of acquiring property and legal rights, using the very social structures that once excluded him to destroy his enemies. Emily Brontë critiques a society that values inherited wealth and social position over individual merit and genuine human connection. Revenge is perhaps the most pervasive theme in the novel. Heathcliff's elaborate revenge consumes his entire adult life. He doesn't just want to hurt Hindley and Edgar, he wants to destroy them completely and extend his revenge to their children. His revenge is systematic and calculated, using the legal and social systems of his time. He acquires property, manipulates marriages, and exploits the weaknesses of his enemies. Yet the novel shows that revenge is ultimately self-destructive. Heathcliff's revenge brings him no happiness or peace. Even when he has successfully destroyed his enemies and controls both estates, he remains tormented and empty. His obsession with Catherine's memory is stronger than his satisfaction in revenge. In the end, he loses interest in tormenting the younger generation because his own death approaches, and he senses Catherine's spirit calling him. The novel suggests that revenge, no matter how justified it may seem, cannot heal old wounds or bring satisfaction. The Gothic elements in Wuthering Heights create an atmosphere of supernatural dread that enhances the psychological intensity of the story. The novel includes ghosts, prophetic dreams, and supernatural presences. Lockwood's nightmare of Catherine's ghost trying to enter through the window is one of the most famous scenes in English literature. Is the ghost real or a product of Lockwood's imagination? Emily Brontë leaves this ambiguous, but Heathcliff certainly believes Catherine's spirit haunts him. He speaks to her as if she's present, begs her to haunt him, and in his final days appears to see her constantly. The wild, harsh landscape of the moors functions almost as a character itself, reflecting the emotional states of the characters and creating a sense of isolation from the ordinary world. The frequent storms, harsh winters, and windswept moors mirror the turbulent emotions of the characters. This Gothic atmosphere suggests that the events at Wuthering Heights exist in a realm beyond ordinary reality, where passion and suffering take on supernatural dimensions. The structure and narrative technique of Wuthering Heights are remarkably sophisticated for a first novel. Emily Brontë uses a frame narrative structure, with Mr. Lockwood as the outer narrator and Nellie Dean providing the detailed inner narrative. This creates distance and allows for multiple perspectives on events. We see the story filtered through at least two viewpoints, and sometimes more, as Nellie reports what other characters told her. This technique raises questions about reliability and interpretation. How much do we trust Nellie's judgments? How does Lockwood's outsider perspective shape our understanding? The timeline of the novel is also complex, spanning 3 decades and 2 generations, moving backward and forward in time. This non-linear structure reflects the way the past continues to haunt the present, how the sins of one generation are visited upon the next. Emily Brontë trusts her readers to piece together the chronology and understand the complex relationships between characters across time. This structural complexity was unusual for its time and shows Emily's sophisticated understanding of narrative technique. The setting of Wuthering Heights is inseparable from its themes and meaning. The Yorkshire moors are not just a backdrop, but an essential element of the story. Emily Brontë knew these moors intimately from her daily walks, and she brings them to life with precise, vivid descriptions. The moors are beautiful, but harsh, nurturing, but dangerous, eternal, but constantly changing with the weather and seasons. They represent freedom from social constraints and connection to elemental forces of nature. Catherine and Heathcliff's happiest moments are spent running wild on the moors as children. The moors are where they feel most themselves, most connected to each other and to something larger than human society. The contrast between the exposed, windswept Wuthering Heights and the sheltered, refined Thrushcross Grange symbolizes the fundamental conflict in the novel. Characters must cross the moors to move between these two worlds, and the journey is often difficult and dangerous, suggesting that moving between nature and civilization, passion and propriety, is treacherous and potentially destructive. The influence of Wuthering Heights on literature and popular culture cannot be overstated. Although initially met with shock and criticism, the novel gradually gained recognition as a masterpiece. By the early 20th century, it was considered one of the greatest English novels, praised for its psychological complexity, structural sophistication, and emotional intensity. The character of Heathcliff created a new archetype in literature, the Byronic hero taken to an extreme, a dark, passionate, tormented figure who is simultaneously attractive and repellent. Countless works of fiction, from Gothic romances to modern psychological thrillers, have been influenced by Heathcliff and the relationship between him and Catherine. The novel has been adapted numerous times for film, television, and stage, with each era finding new meanings in the story. Some adaptations emphasize the romance, others the Gothic horror, and still others the social critique. The novel's ability to support multiple interpretations is part of its enduring appeal. Wuthering Heights speaks to something universal in human experience. The intense, all-consuming love between Catherine and Heathcliff resonates with readers who have felt the power of overwhelming emotion. The novel's exploration of how childhood experiences and social circumstances shape adult behavior feels remarkably modern. Heathcliff's transformation from victim to victimizer illustrates the cycle of abuse that psychologists would not fully articulate until the 20th century. The novel's refusal to provide easy moral judgments or clear heroes and villains challenges readers to engage with ethical complexity. We are forced to sympathize with characters who do terrible things and to question whether anyone in the story is truly innocent. This moral ambiguity was shocking to Victorian readers, but feels contemporary to modern audiences accustomed to complex, flawed characters. The feminist dimensions of Wuthering Heights have been much discussed by modern critics. Catherine Earnshaw's struggle between her authentic self and social expectations reflects the limited options available to women in the 19th century. She cannot be both Heathcliff's soulmate and a respectable married woman. Society forces her to choose, and the choice destroys her. Emily Brontë herself defied gender conventions by writing and publishing her novel in a male-dominated literary world. She created female characters who are passionate, complex, and flawed, rather than the passive, virtuous heroines typical of Victorian fiction. Young Catherine's journey from naive girl to mature woman who actively chooses love and redemption suggests a feminist perspective on women's agency and growth. The novel critiques the marriage market and property laws that gave women little control over their own lives and fates. In conclusion, Wuthering Heights is a novel that continues to challenge, disturb, and fascinate readers nearly 200 years after its publication. Emily Brontë created a work that defies simple categorization. It is a love story, but not a conventional romance. It is a ghost story, but also a realistic portrayal of 19th century English society. It is a tale of revenge, but also a story of redemption and healing. The novel forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature, the persistence of the past, and the destructive potential of both love and hate. Catherine and Heathcliff's doomed relationship asks us to consider whether passionate, absolute love is worth the suffering it causes, or whether the gentler love of the second generation offers a better path to happiness. The cycle of revenge and its eventual breaking suggests that while we are shaped by our past, we are not entirely determined by it. The younger generation's ability to forgive, learn, and love more healthily than their parents offers hope for breaking destructive patterns. Wuthering Heights reminds us that beneath the veneer of civilization lie powerful, primal emotions that can never be entirely tamed or controlled. The novel suggests that denying these aspects of human nature leads to suffering, but giving them free rein leads to destruction. The challenge is finding a balance, integrating our wild, passionate selves with the needs of living in society. Emily Brontë died at 30, having written only this one novel, yet she created a work that continues to speak to fundamental human experiences and dilemmas. The novel's enduring power lies in its honesty about the complexity of human emotion and its refusal to offer simple answers or comfortable resolutions. Wuthering Heights is a novel that must be experienced rather than simply understood. It invites us into a world where love and hate, beauty and cruelty exist side by side, reflecting the contradictions within all of us. If you found this exploration of Wuthering Heights meaningful, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into classic literature. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts on Catherine and Heathcliff's relationship. Do you think their love was beautiful or destructive? Can we sympathize with Heathcliff despite his cruelty? These questions have no easy answers, and that's exactly why Wuthering Heights remains one of the most powerful novels ever written. Thank you for listening, and until next time, keep exploring the great works that help us understand ourselves and the human condition.